Hey everybody, Professor Fiore here. Good morning on this beautiful Saturday morning in New York City. I'm here to talk about a book, a poem really, called Beowulf. It's considered the first poem written in English. It's the first piece of English literature. It's written uh, probably about 1,200 years ago in Old English. So the original language is almost um, indecipherable to us. We cannot understand it, unless you train and you learn this language. There's a couple words that remain, but to hear it spoken, which is beautiful, a beautiful experience. You also won't recognize anything that sounds English, maybe the word king or the word uh, window. I mean, there's a couple little words, he, things like that. But I decided to talk about it because it has some surprising advantages to it. Years after I taught this before at Hunter College in New York City, and I remember students, having trouble with kind of relating to it. And almost everyone I speak to who talks about Beowulf, students or friends or people who remember college say, "Wow, that was I couldn't understand that. It was tough for me, or I couldn't relate to it." And even the movie, there was a movie made with I think Angelina Jolie was in it. I forget who played Beowulf. Um, is was not a successful movie. They kind of tried to turn it into a magical dragon thing. And didn't quite catch, the nuance of it. You might say, well, movies don't catch the nuance anyway. But there are many movies that come very close to their literary sources. There's great movies like Dracula and the Coppola Dracula, things like that. But anyway, so the more I think about Beowulf, the more I think there are things in it that are really valuable and really interesting, and even things that we can learn from, almost in a kind of a self-help way. But that brings up the first question, whether we should be reading to always identify with our own problems, or should we be reading to reach out to cultures and people that we can't identify with. I mean, this is a culture, the Saxon culture, the Anglo-Saxon culture of the 8th century, the early English, which there's a mixture of Saxon tribes and Danish tribes living in the northern part of the British Isles, where their lives were so alien to us, and that's part of the reason maybe it seems so far away. But that brings up the question, like, what is the value of reading something by a group of people that are so unlike us? Is there a way to grab onto it, to learn from it, to maybe just live with the alienness of it? How do you approach that? So today I wanted to talk about indigestible bits. You'll see here in my PowerPoint, there are things about, I kind of made a list of things that seem to be the parts of Beowulf that we cannot connect with. It's a long-standing belief of mine that one of the reasons it's hard to connect with literature written in English before, let's say, 1700, even 1600, before Shakespeare, is simply because, not because we're modern and they're not, but because during the 19th century, there was such a kind of a brainwashing of what literature should be. It should be identifiable. There should be a plot, a plot with a resolution. There's all kinds of things that we believe about literature through the 19th century, and through movies, which are in many cases reflections of the 19th century beliefs, um, that make it that create a kind of a veil or a barrier between us and older literature. And so, one of the things I love to do is think about, for myself too, what it is that I can do to make it come closer to me, and make it valuable to me, and make it beautiful and rewarding to me. So I made a list of the things about Beowulf that are undigestible. But let me just tell you quickly, what is Beowulf? It's a poem. It's meant to be read or sung in Old English. It's similar to the Iliad in that way, one of the early epics that meant to be sung. Um, and basically it's a story of a monster called Grendel that has decided to attack this clan in in Denmark. It's set in Denmark, and goes in at night and just eats people. It just rips them from limb to limb. Nobody seems to be able to stop him. There's no weapon. There's no door that will stop him. He goes in. He just eats who he wants until basically the people are just scattered. They're afraid to go and sleep in the main hall where Grendel likes to go and eat people. Until this warrior from another part of that world, I think it's another kind of peninsula nearby, in this cold Scandinavian, proto-Scandinavian world, arises, goes over there and finds a way to defeat Grendel. You see in the picture here that Grendel's bone of his shoulder is sticking out, because one of the first things he does is he rips Grendel's shoulder off. It's inaccurate, the picture. I mean, I just chose it because it's got some elements that are beautiful. He's almost naked, or his clothing. Part of the thing is that Beowulf takes off all his clothes and gets rid of all his weapons, and defeats Grendel with his bare hands. And then the tale goes on and on. Grendel's mother arises, and she is even worse than Grendel, and he has to fight her, and then that resolves. And then later in his life, Beowulf has one last dragon to defeat, and it ends that way. So that's Beowulf, and I thought I'd even just read a little bit of the beginning from my favorite edition, which is from the Norton Anthology, a great anthology of literature. This is translated by the great Northern Irish poet called Seamus Heaney. You can also hear Seamus Heaney speak. I encourage you to go to YouTube or any other source and just hear a few lines of it. It's quite stunning, how different it is, and it's still English. So just to get the first few lines, it starts, "So the spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There was Shield Chiefson, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of the whole troops had come far. A foundling to start with, he would flourish later on as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan in the outlying coasts beyond the Whale Road had to yield to him and begin to pay tribute. That was one good king." So there's a couple things here you may or may not know. Foundling, of course, means orphan. Many, many heroes in English literature are orphans. There's a lot of good reasons for that. He's a hero, but he's a hero because he is able to attack other tribes. So this is a little unfamiliar right away. He's the scourge of many tribes. And the Whale Road is an interesting thing too. The Whale Road means the ocean. It's a beautiful metaphor for the ocean. But he's a good king because he provides for his people. This is the main point of this opening part. So let's go to Beowulf. I'm not going to go and explain all of that right now, but we'll go to Beowulf, and I'll talk to you about what's so challenging, or I think is challenging about it. One is that Beowulf is family determined. You'll see that it begins with some words about the character's family, and then it goes on, if you keep reading, about his father, his grandfather, his uncles. And he's determined by family, which is unfamiliar to us. We are used to characters who make themselves great by their own actions. Spider-Man, he's an orphan, yes, but it's not because of his parentage that he becomes a hero. Superman is also an orphan, but he comes from an aristocratic family on his home planet, so it's a little closer to Beowulf, maybe. He's also aristocratic, Beowulf. He comes from a king's. When you read the word king in Anglo-Saxon literature and these old Germanic tales, it's not like a king of 50 million people. This is a king of a couple thousand people. But yet nevertheless, he comes from a group of leaders He does not come from the people. He does not come from the working class. So this is unfamiliar to us. And again, I want to emphasize that it's the 19th century that keeps us from viewing this thing. We see this as very natural. We're like, if I want to believe in a hero who makes it on his own, who can be of any identity, who doesn't depend on his family or privilege, or but this is good. This is good. Of course, we want this, but we also should understand that the roots of our beliefs come from the 19th century, come from Marx, Freud, the Romantics, people like that. A lot of that is shaped by the 19th century, which says these things to us, or has influenced us, in this way. Number two, men are central to the story. You'll see that the first bunch of characters that show up in the text I read are men. And things happen because of what men do. Things are successful or unsuccessful because of what they do. It's their strategies, their actions, and their words that move the plot forward. And much of English literature is patriarchal. Hamlet, much of Shakespeare, even the 19th century novels that I seem to focus on are determined by men's actions. Certainly classical literature with the heroes like Achilles and the Iliad. So this is a second part that's not so amenable to modern audiences. And I've taught, at Hunter College, I taught classes of people with, of course, lots of kids from the, parts of New York City, lots of women, lots of people of different backgrounds. And so it is, in fact, difficult to identify with a story and with heroes that are mostly men. Number three, Beowulf has no interior life. So if you study literature and you go before Hamlet, which is around 1603, I think, 1601, I forget, most characters don't have an interior life. Most characters in the Bible don't have an interior life. They just do things. They don't sit and doubt. And we usually count modern literature as starting from characters that do doubt themselves. Don Quixote is considered the first novel because Don Quixote thinks and he wonders and he wants to be something that he's not. Whereas many, many characters in the medieval times in the Bible, they're not thinking, they're just doing. They're just very exterior. They're very one-dimensional, or we think they're one-dimensional. Jesus, interestingly, does have doubts. He sits in the garden before the day of his death and wonders whether he should take this cup. So that is an interesting thing in the Bible, that there is at least one character, one person, depending, I don't want to offend anybody who believes, nor do I want to reveal my beliefs in a public lecture, but yeah, so this is uncomfortable for us, that he seems to have no interior life, because most of the characters we meet, most of our heroes have a kind of a interior life they doubt. And even in a lot of movies, a lot of action movies, which are very superficial, they never leave out the part where the character doubts himself, herself, wonders whether she's doing the right thing, and then goes on and overcomes those doubts. So it's kind of a dialogue with the inner life that makes stories attractive to us. Number four, the violence is extreme, senseless, and humans are powerless against it. So as I said, this demon Grendel, who we find out as we read the text that he's descended from Cain, in the Bible, is unbeatable. There's no sword that could beat him. There's no door that can stop him. And so this is also uncomfortable. We like to believe with, for example, climate change, whether it's created by humans or not, depending on your, again, I don't want to, take a position here, but we believe that at least climate change, which is really a cosmic event, it's an event that influences our planet, right? We're just humans. You think about, for most of our history, we didn't think that, yes, we can stop the sun from rising or anything like that. But yet we believe that we can intervene to stop it through our actions, right? Through our control of our actions, right? COVID can be contained. In the past, pandemics are just pandemics. You pray and that's it. Cancer, even death. Sometimes you hear in the news, some guy has frozen him, like Disney froze himself. Maybe, there's a cure to death itself. So we have this belief that there's a logic to villainy, to evil, And in many movies and tales, the evil person is evil because of some bad event that happened to him, or because he's trying to get revenge for, there's always some way of making sense of it so that the solution makes sense too. And this is what's uncomfortable in Beowulf. So these four things are uncomfortable, and I've come up with some responses to that to maybe start to get us to think a little more about how to manage this text so that we can start to appreciate it. So yes, he's family determined, but he still gains everything through personal courage. So yes, he comes from kings, but kings are powerless against Grendel. And privilege itself does not give anyone any extra power. In fact, they get murdered just like everybody else. Um, and not only does he beat Grendel from his merit, from his personal courage, but he has to continue to use that personal courage as each challenge arises. There's Grendel's mother who arises, then and he lives a good life, but then towards the end of his life, he's about to die. He has to fight one last dragon, and he does die. So that is an element in modern hero construction, where people succeed from their merit, not from their privilege or their family. But think further about this family thing and thinking realistically, the school we went to, the college we went to, the family we're a part of, the network that we've built up over the years of professional and maybe school, we still draw from those. Many of us draw from those privileges. I'm not saying it's a terrible thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying, before we cast a stone and say, wow, that's an ancient text, and isn't it stupid that or isn't it, wow, that was the old days before people can arise out of nothing and make something of themselves. But we still live in a society where there's hierarchies and, you know, virtual aristocracies and family legacies and all kinds of things that give privilege. So, let's be a little more humble about it, maybe. Number two, men are central to the story. Yes, they are. And it is a patriarchal story, like a lot of old epics, Greek ethics, the Roman ethics, like Aeneid. But when in this story in particular, women actually determine much more than in many other ethics. I mean, in epics, in Iliad, the only powerful, central woman is Helen, but she's basically a victim of kidnapping, and she's not really determining the action. Whereas here, the mother of Grendel appears as more powerful than Grendel, and yes, Beowulf does beat her. And I would discourage a Freudian reading of this. Again, Freud is 19th century, but she is a complicated character because she is, although she's evil, she arises from Cain as well. She's doing it to defend her son. She's trying to get revenge, to say, I'm a mother, even though I'm a demon, a monster who lives underwater and can kill anything. I am a mother. And this is a complicated, a complicated thing. Maybe Alien, movies and Alien, you can relate to that. But there's an even more important female character, and that's the queen. And there's a very interesting scene after Beowulf has saved everybody. He's beaten two monsters. The king is ready to give him an inheritance and say, wow, you saved our whole clan. And the queen gives a drink to Beowulf and says, no, here are your gifts, which we set out for you, the proper gifts that we give to heroes. But the king is still the king, and his sons are still his sons. And thank you so much. And we'll see you again sometime after goodbye and have a good voyage. So she actually determines the limits of Beowulf's privilege and the limits of the rewards Beowulf will get, even though he has saved everyone. This is more powerful and less patriarchal, actually, than a Spider-Man or a Superman, because they have limits, but their limits are self-imposed. They're imposed because of their character. Spider-Man is humble. He lives in Brooklyn. He's a regular guy, and so he follows the ethics of the 20th century. But here, Beowulf, who is more powerful than any other warrior, is put in his place by a woman, and very explicitly. So this is very interesting. Beowulf has no interior life, right? But maybe there's a lesson there for us. Here in our modern world, how much of our success and our moving forward is determined by our interior life? Do our thoughts give us a better job or give us a better relationships, or do our actions determine whether we move forward? Now, words can be actions. Okay, that's a separate problem, and it's interesting to study the philosophy called performativity. Um, but it actually says very explicitly when Beowulf first arrives on the peninsula where he's going to fight Grendel. The poet actually says words are more powerful than actions are more powerful than words. And so maybe there's a lesson there for us that maybe, yes, he has an interior life, but maybe that's not relevant to what needs to be done in this situation. And even in Hamlet, that actually arises. Hamlet thinks and thinks and thinks, but really the plot is moved forward by Hamlet's actions and inactions. So that maybe is Shakespeare taking a look at that as well. Okay, and the violence is extreme and senseless, and humans are powerless. It isn't that terrible. It's difficult to read a text where no one can really beat this monster. But the monster is a metaphor, and here I'm making a theory, for all the things that can afflict humans at that time that they really are powerless against. This is if you ever see these ruins, the Viking ruins in northern Scotland, or the Orkney Islands, where they recently found these dwellings. This is near the Arctic Circle. The people live to 40 years. The winters are ridiculous. There's incredible hunger. Storms are just outrageous. You can barely survive with a clan of 20 people, looking for oysters. So they did in fact face things that were intractable, things that cannot be avoided, evils that did kill them, you see. And aren't we more magical than they are? We are more ridiculous in terms of our beliefs than they are, maybe, because we believe that we can beat anything. And they're saying, you can't beat everything. There is such a thing as evil that cannot be beaten. But the hero can beat his own doubts. The hero can draw on his own faith. The hero can connect with his own people. The hero can interact with a human family, women and men, in ways that are sensible, orderly, predictable, ethical. And so maybe their message is something that is good for us, right? We are very arrogant to think that we can beat anything, just ourselves. And they're saying, well, there's a place for faith. There's a place for connection, family, brotherhood, sisterhood, companionship, loyalty. And I'm not advocating for a conservative worldview here, but I'm just saying, let's not just kind of judge Beowulf based on this kind of apparent surrender to the forces that are bigger than us. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this look at Beowulf, and I hope you got some benefit from it. I hope that maybe if you're studying it, if you're in English 101, or you're in a survey class, or you're just a lover of literature and you'd like to think about these great works, suppose, I don't know, again, I don't want to take positions, what is a great work, but maybe this opened up some thinking on this text. So you leave a comment if you'd like me to do other videos on Beowulf that maybe break down some of the issues that I brought up. Let me know. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah, hope it was useful. Take care, guys.